Welcome to the Peak Provider NDIS podcast. My name is Chris Hall, your host, and today I've got Jason Collins with me. Now, Jason Collins is from Lumary. You may well have heard of Lumary. It's one of the top tier client management systems out there. They can do rostering, billing, payroll, the whole lot. And Jason is in charge of strategic corporate development. He's the vice president for the organization there. And today we're going to talk about not really kind of so much Lumary, it's about his journey in the NDIS, because he's got a fascinating background, and including, formerly being the CIO for Life Without Barriers. So he's kind of got a very interesting software development background combined with disability and lots of other things. And I want to sort of bring that all together to kind of explore some of the learnings that he's come to realize by working, should we say, in both sides of the industry. So Jason, welcome to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on. Thanks, Chris.
It's good to be here. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. So look, you've got your current role now. So the Chief Information Officer role, the CIO, that was a role you had at Life Without Barriers. That was for 6 years. And now indeed, Lumary is a software company. Now, of course, Lumary works inside of, both the health side of things, but also the NDIS. But can I just ask, what made you transition to the disability sector?
Yeah, good question. Life Without Barriers is a bit of an institution in Newcastle. It was started there by a couple of local business people a few decades ago. So I'd always known about it. And one of the earlier CEOs was a mentor of mine for a little while. So always had quite a bit of involvement in the organisation in the early days. For me, then I sort of travelled. I worked in the UK, worked in New Zealand, Melbourne, a few other places, more in sort of banking and insurance, health insurance. But yeah, the opportunity came up for Life Without Barriers, and I just grabbed it with two hands. I'd been involved a little bit in the NDIS just when it was launching. So at NIB Health Insurance, where I worked, we had a bit of a working group looking at the NDIS and what we might be able to do to assist in that space. So I had quite a bit of understanding of the challenges that were coming, and for me, joining Life Without Barriers was just very early days in the NDIS rollout. So it was a great time for me. I could, great challenges, but also great opportunities, and I kind of liked that challenge myself. So
yeah, nice.
For me, it was an easy one. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I actually didn't know that Life Without Barriers was a Newcastle founded organization. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a coastie, so I'm just
local business people.
Yeah. There's a coastie just down the road in the Central Coast. There you go. There's a local bit of knowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's quite amazing, actually, how many of the top 25, are actually just New South Wales based. Like, for example, Achieve Australia is New South Wales based as well, and both organisations do an amazing job. And it's just interesting to hear those roots there. Yeah, and it goes to show, by the way, when I think about the growth of organisations in the NDIS, I think a lot of providers get a bit stressed out with the idea of having to go national all the time. Bit of a side note, but there's so much stuff you can do in your local area or in just your state.
There is definitely. And Life Without Barriers has always had this commitment from the beginning about doing, I guess, caring for people that were, where there's a lot of complexity and challenge there, and they've never said no to anyone. It's part of their core, values. So I guess that sort of meant that growth has happened fairly quickly. To be, one of the largest now. So
when I think about my former IT career was at Accenture, so that was my first thing I did out of university in my 20s. So that kind of like I see it like my marine boot camp of professional services, where you get hammered and do your 56-hour weeks and have your high pressured environments and learn how to do project management, learn about systems. Just that to me was like a great foundation for my career, because I still bring that professionalism and an IT project management perspective to what I do now in the NDIS. Like, I can't escape the inner geek that I've got. Just on a similar note, I'd be kind of interested to hear from you from your banking sector experience. Are there any particular threads of foundation that you feel are still with you today?
Oh, definitely. I think, working on complex, highly stressed environments, I think it's a good foundation to have that. I think I've got to say too, though, moving to Life Without Barriers, it is a quite complex, large organisation, and really well run. It's there were challenges with the NDIS coming across and the difference in funding. There's a lot of similarities in any big organisation to survive at that size has to be mature. So they have to have a certain standard that they do apply. But I think, for me, the working in larger financial services organizations gives a really good foundation in complexity and managing finances and those sorts of things that, certainly is carried through other parts of my career.
True. And I'd say that, gosh, for NDIS providers at the grassroots level, cash flow is king, right? So, I think that best practice nowadays is to do your billing weekly, for example. And I think a lot of providers, sometimes get stuck on being inconsistent on their billing, regularity. Some people, think monthly is okay. Some people think it's a big achievement to go to fortnightly. But increasingly, from a technological point of view, gosh, if you just get your ducks in a row, it actually doesn't have to be a big stress, does it, to do things weekly?
No, that's right. And a lot of that now, particularly in the steel space, a lot of that can be automated as well. So, it's really light touch for some of that regular recurring billing. So I think that should be the focus here, getting to that point where it's light touch, it's regular billing, the cash flow is not an issue. Particularly, with the NDIS, it's fantastic the amount of choice that it gives to participants, but financially there's a big challenge on providers to really make sure that they've got cash to pay people's wages. So not as easy as it used to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you say automated there on the SIL side, are you alluding to weekly billing, where you can basically take the average, for example, across the year and say, on average, public holidays, all of the variations aside, this is the average invoice amount?
That's right. There are a lot of things as part of it. A SIL support agreement that in advance what's going to happen. So setting that up as an automated regular billing process, I think, is good practice.
Yes, I agree. There's for those interested, I just did a webinar on that called Mastering SIL. It's at peakprovider.com.au with a specialist called Resolve, and that's exactly one of the things they recommend, because the whole cash flow thing, like it's quite normal to pay your staff fortnightly, and we know that even with plan managed participants, it can take, I don't know, depends on your plan manager. Some are like 3 days, 7 days, 10 days more. So it's all about just getting it out there. I see it like a ping pong match. As soon as that ball comes to your court, you've got to hit it straight back, and keep the movement, keep the momentum. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so okay. So I can. The reason I picked up on that is that I think about the money and your finance background, and the cash flow is king. That's what kind of comes present for me.
Yeah. There's always other things like irregular supports. You've got to be on top of those things too. But I think the recurring things that in advance should be automated where possible.
Correct. I mean, even the irregular supports thing, I feel like, sometimes it can be educational disconnect with maybe the rostering team doesn't always know what that actually means and when you're allowed to use it and how to capture things in a certain way. So, training is very important for that. If I just wind up to a macro level, because Life Without Barriers, amazing experience, 6 years, that's, I'm sure, got a lot of depth to it, where you've, seen things come and go. You've probably changed systems. You've probably done a bunch of projects, I'm sure, in terms of implementation. So having gone through all of those life cycles of that, if you kind of just put that CIO hat back on for a second, when you think about client management systems from an agnostic CMS level point of view, what would you say the top 3 priorities are for any NDIS provider from a CMS?
Yeah, it's. I think we've touched on a couple already. So particularly around anything around efficiency of workforce management, that's always number one. So making sure, particularly if you're a provider with a large number of support workers, it's quite complex to do that efficiently without having sort of claims leakage, and making sure that that's really done efficiently. Not so much penalties in terms of payments and so on. And really doing that within the funding envelope that's given to a particular participant is a big challenge.
Yeah,
I think the second one, I mentioned claiming as well, but anything around the financial side, it's really sometimes it can be survival work that's happening there. So making sure that claiming, as I mentioned before, is automated where possible. And also we have an API that interfaces to Proto at the moment. So we can do that automated claiming process now. But I think the third one for me, and I always like to bring it back to this, those things are good and they're very important for survival of an organization. But I think there's a big challenge around quality of care. So things like making sure that, there's a plan with goals for participants, and that's being tracked and working towards those things. And then some of the other things around restricted practices,
Yep.
medication management, incident management, those things too. I think doing those things really well and be able to hand on heart say that, you know, a provider is giving really good quality service and care to a participant. I think that's the third challenge I would always like to call that out too.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, look, having been the director of a sole provider myself, like my IT brain went, it was like an alarm bell going off. We went, wait a minute, we got our system, we got various systems, right? We had honestly, yeah, it was just a fairly average rostering system that was, not very well known. And then we had that combined with their own portal, combined with other things, and it was all good. But we used Microsoft, and I was like, oh, wait a minute, we've got an opportunity to use Microsoft standard functionality from a SharePoint point of view. And SharePoint, for those that don't know, it's like Google Drive or a OneDrive, but for the organization, and it's collaborative, and you go have team members and all that kind of stuff. And the point was for me is that when I thought about observations, for example, like say if you wanted to, input something onto the PRN register, or you want to have a restricted practice register, do an observation for a stool chart, whatever. By using Microsoft stuff, you could do that observation, as a live document, because I feel like architecturally you fundamentally got relatively static documents. It could be the support plan, could be the current year's behavior support plan, it could be the things that are the things to read if you've not worked with the person before. And then you've got the live documents that need to be maintained and added to, and registers, etc. So one thing I do really enjoy about the Lumary solution, having looked under the hood, is that I know you can do certain observations, can't you, within the system? So it's kind of like within the actual CMS itself, you can make an observation directly, can't you?
Yeah, and I think that's really key. Sort of tracking data within forms or so on is really important, because you can say that you're doing the observations that you need to do, but tracking data points discretely against observations or recordings of activities for clients, I think is really important, because then you can use that and track that over time, and then determine behavior that you do after that. So you mentioned stool charts or food intake, fluid intake, those sorts of things. If you're tracking those and you can see some patterns there, it's really key to be able to access that.
Yeah,
I think just to really understand where the participant is at and what their needs are, and be able to meet those needs accordingly.
Yes, exactly. Because I mean, that's mentioning one specific thing about Lumary, and again, there are systems that they don't offer that, and what they can do is offer a file upload, but again, it's static. So again, it's that simple distinction: what's static, what's live, what needs to be maintained. Because again, like I think providers miss that point sometimes, that you can't only upload your static documents because then you can resort to honestly bad practices, such as printing things off and doing pieces of paper and take like that either stays at the house or it never gets digitized, and it's a mess. Like, it's not how things should be done anymore. You need a digital solution. So you either need a comprehensive enterprise grade solution like Lumary, or you need to combine your CMS and what it can do for maybe static documents, but then have something like whatever that is, some kind of digital solution to maintain registers and observations elsewhere.
Yeah.
If your system
no, absolutely. It's really important.
Yeah. Okay. And I totally agree with those things. By the way, for people listening, when I say CMS, like I'm talking about your rostering, your billing. Some people use different terms, right? Interestingly enough, working in sales and marketing, sometimes I say to people, "Do you have a CRM?" And they go, "Yeah, we've got Lumary. Yeah, we've got blah." And I go, "No, wait a minute. That I would call that a CMS, right? I would say that for like thoroughbred end-to-end sales and marketing, I'm talking about HubSpot, ActiveCampaign, that kind of stuff." And my simple observation, but I want to hear your point of view as well, is that I think it's okay to sort of accept that a CMS does the amazing things that it does, and then there's absolutely a place for pure sales and marketing via a secondary system. Right? What do you think of that?
Yeah, definitely. No, I agree with that. And I think, so we use the term CMS, but we call it care management system.
Okay. Yep.
But as well as that, so Lumary is built on the Salesforce platform, which is
it?
it's the tier one CRM system
Yep.
as well. So out of the box, we have really good capability around inquiry management,
Okay.
tracking inquiries over time before intake.
Yep.
We handle wait lists. We can do all of those things
That's
natively
cool.
because of that native Salesforce, under foundation. So really power does both quite well.
I didn't know that. That's really interesting. And let me ask it in layman's terms. Can you, if you also had Salesforce for your, I don't know, for your pure sales and marketing thing, does that mean that it can more easily integrate with Lumary from an API point of view?
Yeah, absolutely. We have full connectivity. So
Oh.
people have their own Salesforce orgs internally. We can connect with those, for whatever needs.
Yep.
It comes down that we'll sit down with a provider and
Mm.
work out what their needs are and what we can do, and then we'll come up with the best solution for that.
Yeah, exactly. Because one of the things that I feel like there's a gap to be bridged between whatever your system is and whatever your sales system is. When it comes to, I call them sometimes intake forms, referral forms, etc. Like a lot of that data, getting the participant's name, the NDIS number, the stuff about their doctors and all the plans and all their needs, like depending on the CMS that you use, a lot of that data needs to eventually end up in the CMS, doesn't it? So like it can be beneficial where possible to like have some form of a digital form or something that collects that referral information directly. So that even if you're still going through the dance of the sales process, so to speak, and you don't know until it's done whether you've got someone signed up, if you can just have that data point existing in the CMS through that form, I feel like that's beneficial. What do you would you agree with that kind of point of view architecturally?
Totally. I think a really good use case is it's around still homes and vacancy management.
Okay.
So in those still homes, so you could have your public facing website, people could lodge an inquiry there that can go straight through to Lumary as an inquiry against the particular home that you might have on the site, and just tracking wait lists, doing sort of management of that inquiry, going back through the system, going back through to the participant or their families. And just having that full end-to-end life cycle of the participant, and what their needs are and how a provider can meet those needs. So that's certainly the data from Lumary can be made available to your public website. And inquiries that come through your public website can go straight through into Lumary as well. So it's really quite seamless.
That is interesting. I think what my gut tells me I want to do a webinar on that. I want to go under the hood a bit more and
happy to do that.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Okay. So in terms of your role at strategic corporate development, what does that actually involve?
Yeah, so it's quite a few things. It's quite varied, and it's not a very specific title for a good reason, because it's quite a lot of things that I do. So I guess one of the reasons why I joined Lumary, so I was a customer of Lumary for a number of years through Life Without Barriers. So I had that full experience of the implementation across a very large organization, a few thousand support workers using the system. And we sort of, we might touch on this a little bit later on, but some of the, I guess, opportunities to extend the product I was quite passionate about. So I was given the opportunity to come to Lumary and to do those things. So one of the key parts of my role is I own now the disability care product. So that's from, the product development and roadmap through to, supporting the sales process, working with our partners, so Salesforce and other partners that we have internally that are part of the ecosystem. And a few other things in that space, a bit of industry expertise and so on that I bring to different teams as well. So it's really quite broad, which is how I wanted it to be, and I've loved it. Lumary is a great product. No surprise I'm going to say that, but also great people and a great culture as well. So for me, my role was really to sort of add the expertise that I have around the sector and the NDIS and the challenges that a provider is going through, and to try and then make sure the product becomes the product that everyone, even better than what it is now, that people are really looking for. So
I love that, kind of jumping onto the other side of the fence, but with deep context, because you were directly in that role. When we had the CEO of Southern Cross Support Services on the podcast, and she talked about visual care and how they actually in-house on purpose got a visual care developer And it's just another story about how, like,
Yeah.
when you've got the right passion at the provider level, it's about like a deep integrated relationship where there's genuine buy-in. It's not just seeing it as a tick and flick, it's a system, whatever.
Yeah.
It's bringing that deep buy-in to optimize the system. So I think that's really quite unique to hear those stories. That's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell me about pace, right? So what impact do you think pace is going to have on systems like Lumary, NECMS, all of that?
So I think pace, so you look at the broader changes coming, I think one of the great things, and this has always been part of the scheme, is around greater choice to participants. So I think that's going to be really good. It's, it's always a good thing. I think most providers would agree, though, that adds extra challenges. So we need to make sure the systems support that as much as possible, which is something we're working really hard on. And we've been working with the pay system for quite a while now, just in the early days of pilot and so on, and with some of our providers who are part of the piloting as well. And any big system that comes like that, there are challenges with it, but I think everything from a technical point of view is going really well. So we have integrations now to parts of the system where we're continuing to work on those as they're released. So doing lots of development and testing and so on those, and working with our providers who are using the system. But yeah, I think there's a little bit of work to go, but I think it's looking really good for the future. And I think that extra choice that it brings to providers will be worth the effort involved in switching. So I think a good outcome, good development all round.
If I recall correctly, I think there's some new things where is it that the participant has to digitally sort of associate and nominate their provider?
Yeah, that's right. And there's, changes to the way that the, allocation of funding and sort of blocking of that funding happens and so on, quite a few things. So I think, it's just another challenge. It's one thing you can guarantee about the sector, particularly with the challenges around funding with the government, that there'll be changes to come. So, I'm sure everyone knows that that's what the future is. And we're sort of working very closely to make sure we're ahead of all of those.
Absolutely. I mean, the future of the NDIS to me is IT focused as well as service focused, right? It's really, to me, I just see it as the philosophy of the scheme needs to just continue, and it's only going to be increasing IT developments and enhancements, and it's just always going to be about how much are you making sure that you're staying on that bandwagon and on that train. Like, as if you can't, I don't think you can get off that train. Like, the philosophy and the text is going to continue to evolve. If you don't stay on that train, then you'll get behind, I think.
I agree totally. And I think a lot of that's driven by, it's, working for a provider and then sort of having a lot more involvement with other providers now, it's really clear across the sector, there's a real strong passion and commitment to participants. And I think with some of the financial challenges that will continue and will escalate, there'll be a lot of pressure to make things more commercially viable without sacrificing any of the level of care. And I think technology has a big part to play in that.
It does. It's interesting seeing the trends as well, because I've observed over the last years the trends of self-managed, plan-managed, agency-managed, and basically the portion of the market that are self-managed is relatively consistent at around 28-29%, and it's just like staying flatline. And I think that's down to personality type. Like before all of my NDIS stuff, I did coaching, on psychometric tests and psychology and all that stuff. And for example, my son's a participant, and I chose to be self-managed because I'm that personality type, for my son, right? I think that's always going to be fairly consistent. That's my point there, right? There does seem to be a trend slowly of downward the agency managed side of things, but I think the agency managed is always going to be there because of complex cases, especially SIL and SDA. So the funding's too big. The participants sometimes, unfortunately, can be overly vulnerable because of the lack of informal supports and networks and public guardianship and all that jazz. So I think that's always going to be there. But again, the trend, therefore, is that plan managed funding is increasing. So just if I can focus on the agency managed thing, you mentioned that API to be able to claim via PRODA. So, is that, are you describing there, for example, when someone's agency managed, the ability to make a direct claim?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So we have integration with that. Currently we can check sort of support agreements and, service bookings and those sorts of things, and, notify in the system when something's changed. Sometimes something might change at that end, and, a provider doesn't know that that's happened. So we certainly have good sort of, real-time linkage to that. But yeah, the claiming is quite a popular thing that we do for a lot of our providers, so automate that process through the API.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And it will it be similar, once PACE is fully, there, or will it be a similar kind of a deal for agency managed?
Yeah. That's right. So as providers transition across, we can handle that sort of, change in that sort of endpoint and where we do that. So it should be quite seamless. But yeah, a lot of testing being done with clients at the moment, and we'll continue to do that. But
yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
God, it all makes me think about the business model, because, like, as a coach that does sales and marketing stuff, I help providers scale. And one of the common journeys for this people starting out is, I've got a 1 to 2 year period where I'm unregistered, and then I'm going to be registered. And once I'm registered, then I want to do the registered stuff like SIL, right? That's a very common story, right?
Yep.
So, at that future point, when you're 2, 3 years, 4 years down the track, and you're doing the agency managed stuff, these types of things are quite crucial. But there is indeed that initial period. So, being a technologist, I kind of think about, if you can have your things lined up as much as you can from the beginning, there's benefits, because you don't have to change over systems and migrate. But from your point of view, for that kind of smaller portion of the market, that side of things, but they want to get there, so to speak. What's your perspective on having the fully fledged CMS from the beginning?
Yeah, interesting timing. I was talking to a provider yesterday, a CEO, who implemented the Lumary system a number of years ago when they were just starting. There were 3 people.
Okay. Really?
So they made a decision at that point, let's get the system in and let's then grow with it. And for them, it's worked really well. So, they now have 150 support workers. Whereas if they were starting with that 150, it'll be fine, but it's going to be more complex than when it's much smaller numbers. So they developed a really good understanding of the system. They knew, how it worked. There were some things they wanted to add and customize. But, then they were able to then grow quite seamlessly with the system that worked for them at that small scale to now a much bigger scale. So look, I think the other guidance that I would give as well is, it's an old adage, you should never automate what you don't understand. And I think it's definitely worth making sure that you have robust processes, mature ways of doing things now before you go to a system, because, trying to change to a system and then also trying to change everything you do as well just adds complexity. It can still be done, but it's a pain point that providers need to be aware of. It's something that they should always be focused on, best practice in their system, whether it's manual or system-wise. And then it just makes that transition to a system, much more seamless.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, because the whole the wrong way to think about implementing a new system is like, oh, I'll get a quote from system X, system Y, and they'll do it for me. Like, of course, the SaaS provider, which just means software as a service, that of course they're going to have a project plan and a migration plan and an implementation plan and all that stuff, and it's going to be great. Tick. But we can't, as providers, underestimate if you're migrating. If you're going to do it right and you're at 150 staff, 150 participants, probably going to be a 3 to 6 month migration project where you have to staff and resource that internally to make sure you don't muck up or miss any of the migration points from a data point of view, process point of view, all of that. It has to be pretty. I know that from working at Accenture. It's a serious thing to go live, so to speak.
It is, and it's not really about the technology at that point. For us to create an environment, have it ready, and start doing customization or configuration for a particular provider. That's not really a very time-consuming part, but it's really then understanding what they're doing, them getting an understanding of what the product does, and that sort of gradual increase in expertise and knowledge and confidence, probably more than anything, and then moving a large number of people into using this as part of their everyday process. So it can be can take some time to do that process, but that's one of the things too, that regardless of the system, whether it's a new HR system or a finance system or whatever, there is that sort of transition period, and it's not about just installing the software and walking away. I think one of the other things in my role too that, I've started to focus on is, going back to my experience in doing this and also being a customer of Lumary and going on that journey of implementation and so on, is some partnering with some of our providers to sort of assist with that sort of greater understanding. And it's not just about Lumary, it's about, how does this fit in with the rest of the items on your technology roadmap? What is the capability of a team to do some of these things, particularly in areas of change management, risk management, governance, and so on. Things like data migration and integration and sort of reporting and analytics. What's the capability of the team in those things? So, we've been sort of helping people in the last, in the short period of time since we've started that work, but it's been quite popular. People are really keen to get some broader assistance as part of not just the Lumary implementation, but it's really helps with the success of the implementation. So
yeah, it does. Okay, so in terms of SIL houses, one of the kind of common gaps I see with CMSs is that it's hard to see the house, so to speak. Like, it's hard to literally in the system go, I've got 10 houses, click on house, what's involved in that house, whether it be the participants or the staff associated to it, tasks, calendars, the whole lot. What's the kind of approach to seeing the house in Lumary?
Yeah, it's a really good one. And it's something I heard quite a lot when I was at Life Without Barriers. Really, there's really good analytics and reporting across the whole organization, but sometimes you just want to see one house. And if you've got more than one SIL house, you really need that sort of close view of individuals. And it's so since I started almost 18 months ago, our focus has been really on that particular problem. So looking at an improved way that we do sort of the roster of care and sort of optimization of the billing just at a house level, so of the workforce management just at a house level, and understanding all of, I guess, the cost and the claiming and everything that's just focused on one particular house. Because sometimes you look at the top line in terms of the numbers and things might be okay, but, you really need to dig deep to see there might be, some issues around performance or under servicing, under claiming in one particular house. And you really need that sort of fine-grained view to be able to get to that. So that's a big part of the focus that we have at the moment in the product. There was capability there already, but we really want to make that really, really solid so people can see exactly what's going in one location, but then also have some sort of preemptive warnings and so on, analytics about performance of individual locations, and make sure that there is those prompts to get in there and act if needed.
Yeah, that makes me think again about, sorry to plug my own webinar, but I want to mention it. It's relevant. There's a massive blind spot of even just having awareness around what you just mentioned there, in terms of how well your SIL house is performing. So again, the Mastering SIL webinar that I did, it talks about how the average SIL provider per participant is leaking $35,000 annually, and that's a combination of not billing correctly, and so it's kind of like doing inefficiencies of the way you do your rostering, and also claim leakage is the term. That's a whole thing in itself. There's that webinar goes into why that happens. But the reason it's a blind spot is because most providers just don't even realize that it's happening. So the first step is to have the educational piece to go, whoa, I was once blind and now I can see. Sorry, I shouldn't say that, but you know what I mean. It's the awareness of that. And then you've got to then have the analytics to go, well, what do you do about it? So actually, I make a connection in my mind between the good CMS and that awareness piece around that very common issue, right? And by the way, 35 grand per participant, right? So if you've got 3 people in the house, it's 100 grand a year problem per house, Yeah,
well, there's big challenges in SIL, particularly around the areas of vacancies and so on. And even a lot of times, like if you're a large provider and with a lot of locations, you may not know for a while that there's a vacancy. So yeah, getting that insight into some of those things, where is it, and so I spent a long time in health insurance, so claims leakage is a term that I'm very aware of, but there is a lot of similarities in this environment. And you really don't want to change. One of the things that I guess I got from my time in financial services coming across into disability and healthcare sector is really the passion about participants, and really wanting to make sure that providers provide the best care that they can for those, and that you don't want to focus on the money too much, but you don't want the money to be your undoing. Like you want to make sure that you just do that efficiently. And I think with the help of a system, giving you those prompts and letting you know when there's an area that needs to be addressed, I think is a good balance. So
absolutely. Look, gosh, the word money and profit in the disability sector can sometimes people have see it as a dirty word. The kind of energy that I bring into this is delivering great service is the philosophy that you should be bound by, whether you're for profit or not for profit. So of course you need person-centered, great philosophy, empower people, have a positive impact. But when it comes to money, it's not a dirty word. It's oxygen for your business, because if you can't do it, and when someone leaves, you've got a vacancy or whatever, you don't want to threaten the financial viability of your whole organization because you were just breaking even or making a loss. Like providers, in my opinion, have an opportunity to shift into it's okay to focus on numbers and focus on profitability.
No, I think so too. And it's, particularly with more choice coming now, it's going to be harder for providers. There'll be a bit more churn or people moving between providers because they're getting some better level of service. There's not, it's different to other environments. You don't have a bunch of shareholders you need to return capital to. But it's a good opportunity. If you've got a healthy surplus, it's a good opportunity to spend that money back on your participants, provide extra services or provide something they're not expecting. And I think that's a great opportunity for people to use.
So many things, and your staff too. Like we know that the industry has a staffing issue, and recruitment is a challenge for people. Retention's a challenge too. So if you can find ways to celebrate, it's the kind of Richard Branson approach to train people up so well that they could leave, but treat them so well that they don't want to.
Yeah exactly. So I think definitely providers are getting better in that space too. So it's but it's I always say you don't have to be good at one or the other. You can be good at both. You can provide great level of care and also have a reasonable surplus that you can invest back in your participants and your people.
Exactly. That's the sweet spot. That's what I'm all about personally, and I think it's very important. Tell me how you think AI is going to impact client management systems.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And look, it's going to impact everything. So, which is really exciting. I love it. My background is in mathematics, so I'm been very close to it and following it pretty well. So, look, I think on a number of areas, we've talked about some of the operational side of things, about workforce management and so on. And I think there'll be a big impact on those, making that as efficient as possible. A system can do a good job by itself already, but still with some, interaction from, administrators who are operating that system. But I think with a large complex environment, AI is sort of bringing some real extra levels of automation, I think, to the workforce management problem, because it's challenging. Anything logistics is challenging. So I think the other one for me, and again, I said before, I like to bring it back to the participants. And I think another big one for me is around, as I sort of said before, about the discrete bits of data that you record about participants. So whether it's their fluid intake, whether it's some behavioral incidents, whether it's an incident, another type of incident, whether it's, they had a good day creating some, they did something creative and they had a good experience, those sorts of things, all of that data, I think there's a real solid case for AI to really have a really good understanding across all of your participants and where they're at and what the next best thing we can do for them is. So if there's something that's looking maybe challenging around, they're not drinking as much water as they normally are, or something like that, and really spotting that and be able to say, okay, we might need some kind of intervention, or we might need something to help this participant. And I think things, around a goal achievement, it's a big thing of mine.
Yeah.
And looking at, making sure that we're sort of tracking the data and we're not losing any of that information.
Mm.
And an AI system could say, look, this participant is, reaching those goals a bit quicker. Maybe we can add some extra goals. Maybe we can do something more to enhance their life experience. So I think for me, there's obviously the operational thing, but I think there's a massive opportunity to do more. And it's something we're thinking about very heavily at the moment, is about how we can create better outcomes for participants through AI.
That just gave me goosebumps in terms of the possibility there. Like, I totally agree on the automation side of things. That's like the absolutely thing. And then what you just described there is how language models can do that, but you have to have the data all, integrated. So, if we compare what you just said to, say, ChatGPT, it's a language-based model, right? And so therefore you can feed it a bunch of words and say, what's the trend here, for example, or write me a summary of. So let's say, for example, if you've got, here's where my brain goes. Let's say you've got your goals in your CMS, you've got all your shift notes in the CMS, you've got the OT report, the health reports, the behavior support plan, incident management, restrictive practice incidents, all of that. If you think about the philosophy of even, say, restrictive practice, is that you should implement restrictive practice in a way that seeks to get RPs down to zero as much as possible. So like, if you have all of that data and you can literally look at the language, the words that are in the CMS, then you can use predictive analytics, you can spot trends, you can say, wow, look at this, you can have dashboards to go. Honestly, the times where we had an incident when, unfortunately, it was this support worker was on that maybe potentially was a contributing factor. Do we need to investigate that? Oh, look at the environment. Maybe they were dehydrated and then they had had an incident. It could be just so many things, because you've got that raw data, that you can genuinely get to a better outcome for the participant, because you're setting them up for success, but you have to analyze it.
You do. Yeah. So that's a challenge. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, there's such an opportunity there.
Yeah. Oh, it's great. I mean, when I was at Life Without Barriers, my team did some work around predictive analytics for incidents, and it was really just looking at all of our participant data. So there's not, technically AI, but I guess as an example to show what can come in the future. But we looked at all of the incident data and some other data around our participants, and then try to build a model where we looked at, if we're going to predict an incident, what are the different events that can happen that might be a good predictor of a future incident? And we sort of then had an order and say, here's the top, say, I think we had the top 50 participants where the data is suggesting there might be an incident to come. And then how do we then act on those things and make sure we can, reduce the risk of that? So, but I think, that's fairly rudimentary, but I think what we can do in the future with AI is going to be a lot more sophisticated than that.
Correct. And again, just as a brief architectural point, ChatGPT, I believe, has released enterprise level stuff now. And what that means is that, put it like this, ChatGPT is basically trained on the web and on tens of thousands, millions, hundreds of thousands of books worldwide. So when you type, tell me this, it's literally just looking at a huge data set. And it's kind of the publicly available data set. In the commercial world, and also the NDIS, we have very, very important requirements around privacy. So we're not going to just, we can't dump that private information on the World Wide Web, metaphorically. So I believe the kind of enterprise thing of ChatGPT is that increasingly, I think you're going to see a trend where AI tools say, we're going to use the tool, but we're going to put a wall around the data, and we're going to protect that and keep it in the fortress. It doesn't escape, for good reasons. I would suggest that that's going to be part of the trend as well.
That'll be very much so, particularly with really sensitive data that our providers would capture about their clients. I think one of the things I mentioned about Salesforce before, one of the benefits of a sort of a big enterprise system like Salesforce is so they actually have their own AI similar to ChatGPT called Einstein, which is again within the bounds of the Salesforce ecosystem. So we can have access to that data and run it through those systems without it compromising any security risks and so on. So
that's exactly where it's at. That's really interesting. Now, Shad's Award, when it comes to paying staff, right? So we've got rostering and managing our workforce, we've got billing, but then we've got paying staff, right? And the Shad's Award is crucial. What I see is that in CMSs, there can be either zero award interpretation, and it's a very kind of one-to-one linear thing. I'll visit the daytime rate, the evening rate, the Saturday rate, and that's it. And sometimes, like, I can't say this with certainty, but that might cover 90% of scenarios, and it's sort of okay for a lot of providers. But there is a very crucial 10% where you've got all the nuances, right? Have you got a split shift? Were you meant to be on a sleepover shift, but you got woke up? How many hours were you woke up for, and what care did you do? Do you need a mealtime allowance? When do you need to have overtime? There's all these little variations of allowances as per the Shatter Board, and they're crucial, because if you don't get those right, you could have a fair work instance, right? In terms of someone, saying, hey, you didn't pay me this, you owe me this. So can you tell us about what Lumary does from what I'd call award interpretation point of view?
Yeah, sure. So Lumary does full award interpretation and payroll processing as well as part of the system.
Yeah.
So that's something we can handle completely. And we do have, and look, going back to SHADS award, I think everyone also, most providers, on the SHADS award, but it might be modified a little bit with maybe some extra conditions or some changes or so on. So I don't think I've seen a vanilla SHADS implementation to this point, which is fine, because we have an award builder tool within the system. So we support SHADS out of the box, but also there's times when you need some modifications to that to support different things. And also there are some providers too that have enterprise agreements as well that are different on top of that too. So multiple awards and those conditions, it's quite a common thing. And I think even within an organization, sometimes, regionally, there'll be some different conditions to support, if they're very regional or remote, there might be some other conditions to support those things as well too. So it's quite common, but yeah, we support all of that.
Yeah, cool. That's really good.
Yep.
My IT brain has to ask two questions. When it comes to, say, you've got billing and invoices, and you can either sort of export things to another system like Xero or MYOB or whatever, or you can actually do stuff directly from the CMS. Just out of interest, from a billing point of view, does it go directly from Lumary to the plan manager, etc., or do you kind of ping something across to an accounting system?
So for plan management, it's different. So we'll sort of, we often tend to, with all of these, they're different, right? So you're going to a provider and they'll have their own award interpretation, and they might not want to touch it. It's like, look, we're happy this works, don't touch anything, we'll keep it as it is. So we really look at the specific needs of a client, and then we work with them to work out what the best way to be with. So sometimes we might build as something on top of that to automate some process because it's something they specifically ask for. But yeah, it really does depend on the environment that we're working within and what the customer needs from us. So
okay, in theory though, if you wanted to bill directly to a plan manager from Lumary, could you do that without having to raise an invoice and say something like Xero?
We could do that. Yeah,
that's interesting. And then let me flip it to the payroll side. Do the pay slips and all of that stuff, do they come straight out of Lumary, or again, does it have to go via payroll, the accounting system?
Yeah, so within the system, it'll do that. We then do the interface to the finance side of things and take care of that. But again, I just want to clarify that does come down to some of the nuances and particular environments that clients have. So we can do those things, but we often have to work within what's there already to do that. So
yes, okay, yeah. Because my understanding of when you do payroll directly from a CMS, it might, you do the payroll in the detail there, but then it would be typically like a financial journal across to the accounting system. Yeah, that's
right. So we do that for a lot of people.
Yeah, interesting. It sounds like it's a very flexible system, but also can just do things quite, well, not quite, genuinely comprehensively, from all of these dimensions. So very powerful.
And look, I mean, I think, when I became a customer, it was very early days of the product, and it was still, quite very robust back then. But I think we've now had sort of 7 or 8 years of development and, nearly 200 implementations of providers all around the country. So, we've learned a lot from those things, and we've built the product up to the point where it can do a lot of things now out of the box.
Yeah, exactly. Look, I found this fascinating. What would be let me ask you one final question for the providers that are scaling in the context of IT, CMSs, etc., what would be your pearls of wisdom that you'd give to those providers that are in that growth stage, wherever it's at, whether it's starting or going from 5 mil to 10 mil, whatever? For those scaling, what's your wisdom as a CIO and as a technologist?
Yeah, so from a technology point of view, I think, one thing I can look back on at my time at Life Without Barriers and other places too, but really comes down, a lot of it comes down to the quality of your team. And I think, with a big vision and very clear vision that you communicate to those people, but at the end of the day, it's your teams that do that work. So I would say, if there's big growth ahead, you need a good team to support that, and you may need some extra people, which is often tricky in this environment for providers of different sizes. But I think, just, be strong leaders for your people, make sure they're inspired and ready to go and forge ahead. I think there's so much opportunity. I think it's, within this sector, I feel like it's very self-motivating. You don't have to look too far to see what the difference you're making in people's lives is. And I think as well, there will be a lot of change coming in the sector. That's a norm. So I think be prepared for that. But I think as well, the last one I would say is when it comes to a CRM system to manage all of your participant information and so on, I think really it's best to look and see and have a chat to us. I mean, I'll have a chat to anyone regardless of what system they're using, because I'm still very passionate about supporting technology leaders in the space. So anyone feel free to reach out to me to have a chat. That'd be, I'd love that. But really look at the ecosystem that you're working within and the different systems, whether it's HR and finance and so on. Just putting in a new CRM and CMS not necessarily going to give you everything you need. If you want full automation and efficiency, you might have to look at the wider platform as well. So
yeah, completely agree. It's a spider web. You've got to connect all the dots and see how it scales along the way. Fix the problem now, but make it work through the future. Brilliant, fantastic. Jason Collins from Lumary, thank you so much for coming on today. I've really enjoyed this conversation, mate.
Thanks, Chris. It was good. Me too.
Yeah, pleasure. And just for those listening, if you enjoyed the episode, my name's Chris Hall from Peak Provider. If you're interested in scaling your business from a sales and marketing strat point of view, we offer sales and marketing consulting and events. Go to peakprovider.com.au to check it out. And I'll put a link to the Lumary software for those of you that want to check it out in the show notes below as well. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you soon. Cheers, everyone.